Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Journey Time. This time we're doing it virtually, of course. And today we are joined by a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Mahalet Endale. She is a psychologist based in the Metro Atlanta area. And we're so thankful that she's joining us here today to shed some light and also some tools and some information on how we can all sort of navigate through this pandemic together. Dr. Endale, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, I'm happy to.
So why don't we just sort of dive right into your journey, right? What led you to becoming a psychologist in the first place?
Mhm. So my family were an immigrant family. I was born in Ethiopia, lived in the Netherlands for 5 years before we landed in the U.S. when I was 9 years old. And when you have an experience like that, and you live a life of kind of always being slightly outside the norm because you're not just fully immersed in any one particular culture. And for people who are, they kind of take that experience as the status quo and the norm. But having had the experience of having moved from place to place at these very formative years, I got to see how people do things differently and always had this question of like, why is this one way here and another way, so different in this other place? I don't get it. And some of those answers started to come for me when I was in undergrad psychology, my very first psychology class. Aha moments of this is human nature, this is what people do, and here's why, and this is what they're seeking, and here's what they need, for wellness overall. So it kind of scratched this itch for me and built this desire for me to kind of take this information out to communities, especially communities I've lived in and are coming from, to help people utilize this information to maximize their experience in their lives.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your background too? Maybe I know you own your own company, you're able to serve people through that, just your experiences working in the industry.
Sure. Um, I received my PhD in 2007, and I worked in higher ed, so university mental health, working with undergraduate, graduate, and professional students and doing mental health providers and training for about 10 years. And then in 2017, I went out on and started my own private practice. Um, and have been doing that now since 2017. So about September will make 3 years.
And
Mhm.
speaking of, being able to help people, I know right now we're living in difficult times for a lot of people. We're facing so many challenges with COVID-19 and the pandemic we're living in. And I know even you personally as a human being, you may be, coping yourself. What
Yes.
what advice do you have to anybody that is watching this on how they can navigate this experience as best
Mhm.
as they can?
The main thing to keep in mind is that we're under a constant stressor. So, a lot of times when we go through different periods of stress, there's kind of this finite expected period of stress. And so you can kind of have that timeline in mind to help kind of navigate through. The what we're under is slightly different right now because there is no clear end in sight. And we don't even know what things will look like once the current conditions are over. A lot of us are anticipating that we're not going to return back to what was normal before, that there's going to be this evolving kind of shifts and changes in society, kind of large things that have happened even within my lifetime. I think about 9/11 or the 2008, financial crisis that happened. There is a shift in society that happens after these big things. And right now, this is probably the biggest one that we've seen in our lifetimes, as it is, global. So we don't even know what to expect once everything is done. And that creates a condition of chronic stress that our mind and bodies are having to tolerate on a constant basis, even a component of a collective trauma. So it's not just necessarily stressful, but for some people, it's downright traumatic of what's happening right now, depending on, how directly they're being impacted, either health-wise, health of their family, or financial, parameters. So what you want to think about it as this chronic constant stressor, and the best thing that we can do is really bolster our body's ability to tolerate the stress and really strengthen that. And there's several things that we can do, and this is where I usually start with all my clients. Is you very much start working on it at a physical level first. So what are you doing around, are you eating regularly, and are you getting sufficient meals and sufficient nutrients and quality foods that help bolster the body? Are you getting sufficient sleep? when we're experiencing a lot of anxiety or stress, sometimes our sleep is disturbed. It's not as good of quality. So things that you can do around navigating sleep. Um, and also physical activity. Are you getting at least 30 minutes of some level of physical activity every day, whether it's going for a walk or something more intensive? And if you're used to more intensive, go for it. There's so many opportunities online. Different gyms are offering free classes online. There's tons of resources available through YouTube in terms of yoga, bar, or HIIT workouts, or wide variety of opportunities. And even if those are things that you haven't done before, finding one that fits your current fitness level and trying something for at least 30 minutes a day. And those are the physical components, but you also want to take care of kind of the psychological components right now. So one big thing around that is structure. So do you have structure around your day-to-day existence, or the days and nights kind of blending together? My clients are talking about now going to sleep very late and sleeping through most of the day, or eating their meals, first meal at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. All of those things impact, for example, reversing your sleep. It actually increases your stress hormones, because that's not what our body naturally is designed to do. So it's actually adding stress to your system that it's having to work through on top of everything that's happening in the world. Not getting sufficient nutrients, kind of adding structure is an important part of regulating that to minimize the stress that your body is under. I would also add, what kind of connection are you having every day? So at least 30 minutes where you're having a non-text or written communication with people that are good for you. Sometimes we may feel obligated, but that may not be the healthiest relationships. But who are people in your life who are good for you? And are you connecting with somebody at least 30 minutes a day?
I would love for you to talk about, for people who are tuning in who may, just be learning more and more about mental health, or maybe just trying to take it more seriously. In your thoughts, why should we take mental health seriously?
Mental health literally impacts every component of our life, and our mental wellness in the present not only affects us now, but has ramifications for what comes for years after now. Meaning, our mental state impacts our mood. It impacts our functioning, meaning kind of even your brain capacity. Are we able to use our mind and our abilities to our fullest capacity? Thinking about, like, when you're depressed or super anxious, or how much do you focus, how much work are you able to get done, that kind of thing. It affects our mood, and when our mood is impacted, it affects how we see everything around us, which in turn also impacts our decision making. So we're more likely to make unhealthy decisions when we're not in a good mental state, right, than if we are. And so taking care of our mental health, it really impacts kind of where we go professionally in our trajectory. It has a potential, I should say, right? I don't want to talk definitively, but it has a potential to impact our professional trajectory. It has a potential definitely to impact our relationships. Do we push people away when we're not in a good space, or are we overly demanding when we're not in a good space? How that affects relationships. It also affects your decision making in day to day and how you cope. Do you, one of the things I've talked about during this time is intentionality. So intentionality, not just in kind of what media you consume or how you're talking to people, but also what are you eating? I know you're making good decisions around that, or are you just going to what's easiest? Right now, and as we talked about, nutrients has an impact on wellness. So mental wellness affects all areas of our life, all our relationships, personal and professional. And by taking care of ourselves, we maximize what those areas of our life are too.
And I know, unfortunately, in a lot of communities around the world, there's a lot of stigma around it, especially when you think of Africa, and within the Black community around the world, there's a lot of stigma. So maybe, I know you have a lot of Ethiopian and Eritrean clients, but what are ways we can sort of reduce this stigma within the community?
I think one of the biggest things with this stigma is a misunderstanding of what mental health is, and that meaning mental health difficulties are. People understand physical illness. People understand that whether it's a short-term illness or a chronic illness, that it's it's an understood thing. We know exactly what kind of medical care is necessary to take care of it. It's often either treatable or manageable. And so there's even around physical health, sometimes there's some resistance to reaching out for help. People are willing to reach out because there's a sense of understanding what it is. And I think that understanding around mental health concerns is not quite the same because of the stigma. People don't talk about it. So people are not hearing about people who get the help they need and recover. They don't necessarily hear about people who are having more subtle symptoms that are not as noticeable. It's considered that's their character or their personality. That person is just moody or whatever it is, not recognizing that it's, mental health concern playing out. And then when those people get to a better place, it's, they just got their act together. But actually there's this other dynamic that's very manageable and treatable that's in play. And people generally see what they consider as mental illness when it's reached a very extreme state, in a state that may feel scary. And so I think part of the issue is the absence of conversation of everyday mental health. And if people had more information about that, I think there would be less fear and stigma around it, and really normalizing it. Meaning most of us, literally almost every single person at one point or another in life will deal with some level of diagnosable mental health concern in their lifetime. Life is just stressful. It's what it does, and just like physical stress affects our body, psychological stress affects our emotional well-being. And that's normal. That's your body telling you that something is going on that maybe is beyond your capacity to manage it, and something has to change. And with the right help and support, you can take care of yourself through that.
Thank you for that. I hope that anyone listening can really just take that into your heart, because there's nothing to be ashamed about. There's so much help out there, and we can all work together, to get the support that we need. And so to someone who's never seen a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor, where should they start?
There are a lot of great resources available to find somebody. For people who have health insurance, one option is contact your health insurance and ask them for behavioral care providers, or what they're called under insurance. Ask them for a list of providers who are near me. And then you can go through the list and Google people on the list to learn more about them via their website or online profiles. Because all therapists who are seeing clients generally have some sort of presence online to tell you a little bit about themselves. Okay. And that can help you pick out somebody that might be a good fit. There are also therapist directories. So a couple of the biggest one that most mental health providers are listed on is called Psychology Today. And you can go in, put parameters in terms of location, gender, do they offer sliding scale or not, what insurance you want to use if you have insurance, all kinds of things that you can pick, and even put in what are you trying to attend to? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Whatever it is. And then it'll create a list for you with a picture of the person and a bio of each person. And that can help you kind of narrow down the list of who might be a good fit. There's another directory called Therapy for Black Girls. And this one is specifically targeted for Black women. Or I should say, Black people, not just women. A lot of men find therapists through there too. But these are people who are a little bit more sensitive to cultural dynamics. And by Black, not just necessarily African American, but, the full diaspora of what Black represents. And so that may be a better fit for some people. And then one last one, there's a great directory called the Open Path Collective that has a ton of providers listed who offer sliding scale fees anywhere from $30 to $60 an appointment, in case, a normal copay might not be within your financial budget, or even with insurance, or if you don't have insurance altogether.
That's really helpful, because I know even with me recently, someone reached out asking for resources because they were saying they couldn't afford, the rates. So they were just asking for alternatives. And so to have that example is great, because I can definitely share that information with people. So thank you for that. And I just, I want to ask a couple more questions here, and then we'll wrap up. But just to kind of take it in a different direction, I know before we started this conversation, we were just kind of briefly touching on the world and how a lot is going on right now. A lot of people are losing loved ones, they're losing jobs, they're losing, relationships, friends, things, events, experiences. I know mourning looks different for everybody, right? But in terms of being able to process so many emotions, do you have any feedback or advice on that?
Yeah. One of the biggest things that therapists are talking about right now is that the world is in a state of grief, or globally, and this includes it's inclusive of everybody because we've all lost the life that we know, but especially for people who have lost loved ones to COVID directly. It's at a rate that hasn't been seen again in our lifetime. And grief, and one of the things that's hardest about the current dynamics is that all would have in place to mourn and grief in a way that has meaning has been taken away from us. One of the saddest stories that I remember reading about was a woman who took her husband to the hospital. He was diagnosed. He didn't survive. He succumbed to the disease, and the doctors told her she had to go home and isolate for 2 weeks. So at a point that she lost her husband, it's even hard for me to talk about, she had to spend the next 2 weeks alone at home. And that's unfathomable for most of us because that's when we reach out to each other and we support each other 24/7, especially in communities of color. There's these rich cultural norms and rituals to how we take care of those of us who are mourning. And that's taken away right now. And the first piece of advice that I have for people who know somebody who is mourning is do everything you can to reach out, to let them know that they're not alone, emotionally speaking. Different things that you can do in terms of sending food, sending notes, asking them if they would be willing to stay, through in contact via video chats that are available. Um, Not just letting them know that I'm available. What do you need? A lot of times when we're going through something like this, we don't even know what we need, especially right now. We don't know. They wouldn't necessarily know what to tell you. So just be more proactive in reaching out. It's also wonderful when people work in collaboration around them, and rather than making them figure out the details of logistics, just figuring it out amongst yourselves and just have some sort of system in play them during this time. um, Being mindful, keeping in mind that you don't overwhelm them, right? There may be some times where they really don't want to talk to anybody or they may need a break. um, but just making yourself available and playing a caretaking role that's realistic under the current conditions.
I've seen people try and run away from these feelings or just try and brush them off, you know, but how do you sort of encourage us to listen to, what's going on and tap into those feelings?
Mhm. The first thing is really um, your body knows. Our body knows what we need and what we're capable of. And for some people, depending on how devastating the loss is, this really may not be the time to connect with that. Meaning, again, in isolation, outside of the normal cultural norms of what we would normally want to do, it may be your body's telling you, like, now is not, we can't do this right now. That's part of a trauma response, and that's not unusual. So it's okay sometimes. Be careful what you're doing not to feel it though. So highly recommend avoid, using substances to numb out. It could be alcohol, other drugs, or medications not to feel. Um, Distraction is a healthier option. Um, Activities are a healthier option. Um, but if those things aren't working, I would say that's the point where I would recommend that somebody reach out to a mental health professional to help them kind of take this on in small bite-sized pieces. That's one of the best things about therapy is it helps you kind of titrate whatever pain you're experiencing. If the pain is telling you, like, I'm here and we're doing this, whether you want it or not. Um, Also, do not be afraid to reach out to people. Everybody, I would say most everybody, is ready to receive you and ready to support you. Create a community of people that you feel reaching out to for different things. And maybe one person for lighthearted kind of, I don't want to talk about it right now, I just need to laugh conversations. There's that one person that's perfect for a deep kind of really, let me unpack this conversation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one or two people, but just being able to be in touch with what you're feeling at a given moment and having people in mind who can serve different purposes for you.
Well, as we wrap up here, I just want to sort of end on a lighter note here. So if you could just tell us, what inspires you to keep going? I know these are difficult times and you have a very important job helping so many people. What encourages you to keep going?
I think I've connected, one is my faith at a deeper level than I ever have, and realizing what a source of hope that is bringing me right now. My family. So I haven't had this many phone conversations like my parents and my sister. We do twice a week where we sit down and talk for a good hour, hour and a half, just really kind of connect. My friends, we've been setting up, different check-ins, and one is in New York, one's in DC, one's in North Carolina, and we now just regularly check in of like, how are you? No, really, really, how are you? In those conversations. And then here at home, having, it's hard to say what are the bright spots in difficult situations. The one unexpected thing is getting out of the rat race of what life had been and being forced to just kind of sit at home, having such good time with husband and the kids here. And for me personally, going back to work after I had my son, he's 4 now, was very painful. It was very difficult. I'm suddenly getting all the quality time with him. A highlight was he loves to draw, but I could have never told you what was on that paper. And one day we were doing chalk and he made a person, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a person. Like, I recognize it. And getting to have that moment with him was just, I just had to sit and just let that soak in.
That's really special. Talk about the growth. You're witnessing it firsthand and you get to catch those moments at home. That's so
special. And that would have never happened, if I was at work. So
yeah, well, wow, we've hit on so much, and we appreciate everything you shared with us today. For anybody who wants to stay connected with you, what is the best way for them to stay in touch and learn more about what you do?
Sure. So I'm not all the way in social media yet. I keep telling myself I need to get somebody to help me do this. I'm not on, but I do have a website, atlantamentalhealthcounseling.com. You can also Google my business name, which is Crossroads Mental Wellness Services. And if you do a search on Psychology Today, Therapy for Black Girls, or Open Path, I'm available on there too. And my contact information is listed there too.
Okay. Awesome. Well, there you have it for anybody who wants to stay connected and learn more. I certainly have all your information, so I will definitely be staying connected. But to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being here with us, being a part of this Journey Time episode. We hope you learned something. We hope you took something away, and we hope you feel a little bit more encouraged and know that we're all in this together. We're all going to push through. So from our hearts to your hearts, sending you a lot of love, positive vibes, and peace. Bye, everybody.